President Obama will arrive in the UK tonight before meeting the Queen tomorrow to wish her happy birthday. He's also expected to urge voters to stay in the EU to the anger of Brexit campaigners. Well, joining us from central London is Sarah Churchwell, Professor of American Literature at the University of London. Also there is Douglas Murray, Associate Editor at The Spectator. Very good afternoon to both of you. So we're discussing whether or not the President of America is right to force his opinions on whether or not we stay in the EU upon us. What do you think, Douglas Murray?
Hello? Sorry, I lost you for a moment there.
I was just asking you whether you think the President of America is right to thrust his opinions on the referendum upon us.
Yes, I think so. I mean, he's the head of a very major ally and major allied country, and to that extent, he has the right to say whatever he thinks. It is, of course, obvious that it doesn't necessarily mean that he's right. I've known, as most people in journalism have, throughout my life and my career, people from both sides of the American political divide, Republicans and Democrats, and all of them pretty much are in favour of Britain remaining in the EU. But it's worth remembering why that is. It isn't for any other reason other than that, as I say again, from left and right in American politics, they recognise what a troubled entity the EU is, and they believe that their close ally Britain being in the EU is a very good thing because it helps moderate the EU in a broadly more transatlantic and indeed more pro-American direction. So it isn't as if it's a disinterested argument President Obama is making. He's making the case for Britain to remain in the EU to benefit America.
Sarah Churchwell, this is a partisan approach, and actually, what do you think about whether or not he should be making it? Why should he come to this country and dictate his views to us?
Well, I don't think he's dictating his views or thrusting them. I think he's sharing them. And I agree with Douglas that he has every right to do so. I mean, we all believe in free speech. So he's giving an opinion, and it's an informed opinion. As Douglas says, maybe it's not a disinterested opinion. On the other hand, nobody's opinion in this matter is disinterested. Everybody has, we all have interests and agendas here. And I think it's appropriate for the president to say that in the case of America, this is the view that is taken, and this is why. And I think there's a reason why Obama is as widely trusted around the world as he is, and it's because people think that he's rational and sane and intelligent and well-informed. And I know for myself as a voter that I always want to get as much information as I can. I find it useful in this instance to know that Vladimir Putin is in favor of Brexit, and I find it useful to know that Obama is against it. And I know in a debate between those two people which side I'd like to be on.
Douglas Murray, Ian Duncan Smith is saying that David Cameron went to Barack Obama on bended knee and begged him to stage this intervention. We don't know whether or not that really was the case. But even if it was, or something along those lines, that he very much is in favour of it, David Cameron, of hearing what President Obama has to say and encouraging him to tell the British public his views, is there a danger that perhaps this could backfire because perhaps the British people don't actually want to be dictated to and they could feel that they're being patronised?
Well, first of all, if I could just quickly respond to something that Sarah said there. I mean, of course, just because one person wants you out or one person wants you in doesn't make that argument more or less valid. I mean, for instance, open borders of the kind the EU have had recently have enormously benefited ISIS. To that extent, the EU is terrific for ISIS. Would anyone seriously want the views of Mr. al-Baghdadi any more than Mr. Putin's as to whether or not we stay in? Of course not. Of course, the views of the American president are of interest. As I said, they are primarily for American reasons. But the point you just hit on is a very important one. And there's a very important point, if I may make it now, about this intervention. You see, it would be perfectly polite in these cases for instance, Mr. Cameron to go to America and to say that he doesn't think that the American Constitution is up to very much, and that there's no reason why America shouldn't enter a sort of union of the Americas in which it has completely open borders with Mexico, and in which it, for instance, it allows Cuba to disperse American taxpayer money and Brazil to put laws that Americans have to live under.
Hang on,
of course, it would be a terrible idea for America and for the United States of America, and for many people in Britain, the EU is a terrible idea. The fact that Mr. Obama thinks it's good for us is neither here nor there to that extent, but of course he's very, very free to make the argument.
That is a completely false comparison. Obama's not coming over here and saying, hey, I've got an idea, let's create Brexit. Of course, if Cameron were to go over there and suggest a new agenda, it would be completely inappropriate. I personally do not, as an American voter, do not think it would be inappropriate, for example, for Cameron to go to Americans and say, hey, you know what, I don't think you should vote for Trump. I think that would be okay. I think for him to say, look, those of us in Europe think that that would be a mistake, because that is a live question that is being debated.
Well, the question of the American Constitution is a perennially live question. The question of the American Constitution is a perennially live question.
Well, there are lots of perennially live questions. It's not currently an electoral issue, and so it is not. So you're making things up in order to create absurd arguments. Obama is coming over and sharing an opinion about a very important debate that is happening right now, and we'll both agree that that is completely appropriate. And it doesn't mean that he is dictating what people are going to do. It means he's sharing an opinion.
And I haven't at any point said he is dictating it. I'm saying he's sharing an opinion, and it's a wrong opinion. Because among other things, the things that the EU expects of the UK are things that no American could possibly tolerate for themselves. America would not tolerate a political arrangement in which Cuba dispersed taxes of American taxpayers. It would not tolerate open borders with Mexico. It would not tolerate Brazil dictating laws that Americans had to live under. Yet President Obama seems to think that an arrangement which has become increasingly unilateral from Brussels, and indeed from the European Commission, is something that British people should want to live under, and very many people don't.
Sarah Churchwell, it's an argument that Boris Johnson has made as well. He's accused the president of being, well, he hasn't said it, but he's accused him of being a hypocrite. But others are saying he's being disingenuous because the US would never join an institution like the EU. So how can he come over here and say, you Brits, you should stay in, when they would never do anything like it?
Well, actually, the United States is a federation of deeply divided states that we have a lot of trouble keeping together, as a matter of fact. And you might see that in the U.S. election system right now, this is what's getting debated. It is always getting debated. How do we balance individual local debates with larger ones, and the regional concerns with trying to create something that is larger and operates on the world stage? These are incredibly complicated questions, and everybody will need to make their own decision. I do not think that Obama is wrong to share his opinion. His opinion is an informed one. But the word that he is dictating has been used several times in this conversation.
Not by me.
I didn't say you did say it, but it is being put forward. And what I am saying is that he's not dictating. He's sharing an opinion, and people are free to agree or disagree with it.
Okay, let me just tell our viewers, because we were just looking at pictures of President Obama just leaving Riyadh on a trip there to Saudi Arabia, just boarding Air Force One, actually on his way here to London. So very much a live debate. He's going to be here in a few hours. Douglas Murray, let me ask you this, though. Will his opinion actually make any difference to the debate? Do you think it could sway voters here? Do we hold President Obama in such high regard that it will change anybody's opinion, what he has to say?
I'm not sure it'll change anyone's opinion, particularly on its own, although I think a cumulative effect of the government in Westminster persuading, major allies and others to tell people, if you step out of the EU, it's going to be a catastrophe, will have some impact. I think it's worth remembering that our main alliances, and particularly our security alliances that we're in with America, NATO, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing and other things, don't have any connection to the EU. And so to that extent, if he tries to take part in sort of Project Fear, as it's been called, then I think that would be a great mistake. But just to reiterate this point, the idea that Sarah argues that the United States of America is anything like the EU is purist claptrap. If the United States of America, as we all know, has many problems, but if power and democracy in America was so bad that it had a European Commission-like problem in which a tiny group of people coalesced more and more power towards themselves and had less and less interest in the opinions of people across the Union, then I can assure Sarah that her country of birth would have fallen apart a very long time ago. The EU is an unsustainable project. The United States of America is a wonderful project.
Okay, we get the point you're making. I just want to ask Sarah another point here. If we do vote to leave the EU in this country, will it damage the special relationship we have with the United States, do you think?
Well, I think it clearly will. I mean, I think it's going to create. It's clearly going to create problems with the trade agreements that America is trying to, to foster across the Atlantic. It is obviously going to create various kinds of, I mean, everything's going to have to get rethought. And look, and to go back to Douglas's point, the kind of false binaries here, that to say that if somebody thinks that on weighing all of the evidence that we're better off in, that's not to say that the European Union doesn't have problems that need to be addressed. It's not to say that it doesn't need to be fixed. I think we're all agreed that there are ways in which it needs to be fixed. The question is whether the radical Brexit solution is the correct response to the fact that the EU needs to be fixed. And again, I think that's for everybody to decide for themselves.
Sure.
But yes, it will affect Britain's relationship with America. Of course it will.
It'll make Britain, among other things, a much better ally for America. It will mean, among other things, we're a much better trading partner.
OK, Douglas Murray, Sarah Churchwell, thank you very much for your passionate views there. Fascinating to hear you both.
OK, let's bring in our London guest into the discussion at this point. Do you think this attack will underscore the message of the far right in Europe, at least, of the incompatibility of Islam and the West, or Western values?
That's a pretty atrocious question, if I may say so. We're about 24 hours away from 12 people being gunned down in a newspaper office in the centre of Paris, in a European city, because they offended, allegedly, Islamic blasphemy laws which France, Britain and other European countries do not have and do not believe in and do not follow. And for you to turn the question immediately, not on the people who've been massacred because of asserting their rights as European French citizens, but onto the alleged terrible discrimination of the French, is really quite despicable.
So I didn't ask you anything about discrimination of the French. Let me repeat the question.
You went straight on to the alleged backlash.
Let me ask you the question again, in case you didn't understand it. Do you think this attack? We are in our news bulletins talking in more detail about the actual attack. What you were invited to discuss in this show are the implications of what might follow the attack. Will it underscore the message of those who say there is an incompatibility between Western values and Muslim values?
No, you want to paint the narrative which you think turns immediately, not from the attackers, but on the French society, which you would like to portray. I'm giving you my answer, so why don't you listen to it? Which you would like to portray as somehow anti-Muslim or anti-Islamic or anything like this. Let's start from the fact that 12 people were massacred because European citizens asserted their right, which they have every right to do, to draw Mohammed just as they have the right to draw any other historical figure, which they believe in or don't believe in. It doesn't matter. They have that right. I don't think at this stage whether, a discussion of the far right in France or anything like that is really the point. The point is people were killed and gunned down for doing their job as journalists and cartoonists in a free society.
Okay.
In countries like Britain and France, most of us are not Muslims, and we do not believe in Mohammed as the founder of any faith that we follow. People are Christians, atheists, all sorts of things. You cannot expect, and this is the crucial thing, Muslims should not expect non-Muslims to abide by their own belief systems. You can yourself decide, you as a Muslim do not want to depict Mohammed. But the idea that is coming along in Europe at the moment is a growing idea that people who are not Muslims, who do not believe in Mohammed, who do not follow Islam, are also to be have to obey the rules of Islamic blasphemy. And in Europe at the moment, that is the big debate.
You've made that point, Douglas.
Sure. Unfortunately, if an impartial viewer were watching your program, they'd come away with the idea that all Germans and French people are nascent fascists waiting to expel Muslims. Actually, you just painted, for a journalist, it's quite shocking. You just painted a completely inaccurate portrait of what is going on in protests in Germany, which in actual fact, if you look at it, are highly specific. Can I finish my point?
Let me correct you on a factual
point.
Said I didn't say all Germans or all French are looking to expel Muslims.
But then you decided
and I didn't mention a protest in any particular country. So now that we got the facts straight, please go ahead.
Your incredibly biased portrayal of European citizens starts from your misportrayal of people turning out at protests as being against all Muslims or wanting to expel them. and you, the presenter in Doha, sit in Doha. It really is astonishing. You are painting a picture of Europe which is outrageous. Across the Middle East, cartoons are published every day, every week, with the most disgusting anti-Semitic propaganda, the most disgusting propaganda in them. And you sit in Doha, a not free society, and smear Germans and French people a mere 24 hours after this totalitarian,
I've just corrected you. You don't seem to be hearing me, so let me correct you again. Sorry, sir.
Paris.
I did not say the words all Germans or all French are against or calling for the expulsion of Muslims. That never came out my mouth. I said there are protests in which there have been protests by some in Europe, a minority, who are calling for exclusivity.
They're against Salafists. Do you not follow any details? The German protests are against Salafists. There is a problem in Europe, sir, and the problem is of Islamic fundamentalism. There is now also a secondary problem, which is that many people who do not like the Islamic fundamentalists are objecting to it. I suggest we unite in sorting out the first primary problem in order to also prevent the secondary problem from ever growing.
Okay.
But we have to portray this accurately.
Exactly.
And you as a journalist should be doing that.
We are doing that, and I thank